Hi and welcome along to this video where we're going to look at wet in wet techniques in watercolour. How do you do it and where would you use it? So let's get going. Firstly, I want to show you a couple of paintings that I've done using the wet in wet technique. So we have here our beautiful Buttercup, the panda bear, and we've got wet in wet techniques going on in the softness of the face, in the fluffiness of her ears, and in the background. So pretty much the entire painting has been achieved using the wet in wet technique. And then let's take a look at my rocky beach scene. Completely different, but again, sky created wet in wet. Textured rocks created wet in wet. So let's go down on the table and have a look at how we do it. So here we have my bit of paper and we're going to take clean water and we're going to paint a square of clean water on our paper. Now this makes for really interesting video viewing, and you want to make sure that water's nice and even. So if I lift my paper up to the light, you should see that nice shine on the surface, but no big puddles. And we're going to go along and we're going to add some colour. Now all my tutorials use just 3 primary colours. We have Phthalo blue, which is part of the cyan family, Quinacradome magenta and Hansa yellow. I also add in my own range of colours, my burnt Sienna and Friends Grey, because I use these colours a lot. But everything you see in nature can be created using these 3 colours. Just open your printer and have a look. So I'm taking my Phthalo blue, I've got some water with my paint here, so it's nice and fluid, and we're just going to go along and literally bounce my brush around in the water. And if I just drop it into one of the puddles, just watch it like a little firework burst out and grow in the water on the surface of the paper. Let's have some fun now and take some of my Hansa yellow, nice and watery again, and we're going to drop that in onto areas of the white paper and also over the top of the blue, and tiggle it around with the tip of my brush and encourage those colours to run together. So we're getting lovely greens, we're getting the yellow popping through, citrus, fun. I'm just going to take that colour all the way to the edge and then we would just leave it to dry. Now painting in this way is going to give you beautiful softness within the shape that you're applying the paint to. But what about the edges? Well, with watercolour, when the wet paint hits the dry paper, it stops straight away. There's nowhere else for it to go, and you get these crispy edges form, very sharp edges, which are fabulous if that's what you want. Let's go back and look at the panda. In the background of Buttercup the panda, everything's soft. The colours go from vibrant, they get weaker and they disappear into nothing. And in her face too, we get that softness around the edge of the colour as it fades out. Now if we leave this swatch to do its thing, it's going to dry with crispy edges. So let's do another one. Do another swatch. Clean water, nice and even on your paper. This is cold pressed watercolour paper which has slight tooth to the surface. I'm going to go in with my blue again. And just dance around in my puddle. Now there is one other thing to take into consideration and why this might not always work as well as you want it to. How wet your paper is, how much shine is still left on the paper, and how wet your paint is all have a part to play. So if you're putting neat paint on from a pan that's quite dry with a dry brush, it's not going to move as much because the water's drying back. So do bear that in mind when you're doing wet in wet techniques. Let's take some of my beautiful Quinacradome magenta now, and we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to pop it in. We're going to let it blend with the blue, and sometimes it will be pink where it hits the paper. We're going to take that up to the edge of the square. Now here's the fun thing. Here's your control. To get that soft blended out effect, we're just going to use the power of water, and we're going to bring clean water starting away from our shape, and we're going to paint up until we touch into the paint, and then watch what happens. Watch the paint I'm going to use my right hand so I'm not stretching across. As soon as that paint senses that there's water nearby, off it goes on its travels. And just keep taking that water as far out as you need to the edge of your paper if necessary, to get that blended out soft effect. And then you can encourage the paint as well if you want it to move further in that stream of water. And then what we're going to get is that soft, beautiful finish. So let's go take a look at how I use the wet in wet technique in our panda's face. You want a nice shine and a nice glow to the paper. We want these colours to run and mix and play on the surface. And what we're going to do first is use our grey. And although the bear looks white, we don't want a mass of white paper. So I'm going to use my grey. I'm going to water it down because I want this quite light. Can you see my palette? There we go. So more water. It's nice to mix your grey because the colours kind of break out as well, rather than just have a flat colour. Bit of brown in there. And more water because I want it light. A bit more water. So we're going really light. And then into the water that's down on the page, taking my size 12 round brush, I'm just going to decide, well, pretty much, actually, I'm going to go everywhere. I'm changing my mind. I'm just going to dance my brush around my bear. Looks a bit green. Going close to the edge. And what will happen at the edge is it will feather out into the water, into the background. And you'll have a nice, soft, fluffy edge to your bear. I'm going to go into his ears. I'm leaving some gaps on the paper. I'm going to go over the eyes. All over his head, just to give him a hint of colour. He looks like I feel a little bit green. I'm going to add a bit more blue in there. There we go. I'm not too worried what colour he is. Now this is going to dry back nice and light. And can you see the patches that I've left? The only place I'm not going is in his mouth. And I'm not doing his body just yet. We'll come back to the body. And now I want to bring in some of these lovely tones that you see around his cheek. I'm going to start to make his face jump out a little bit more. So I'm going to take that lovely yellow that I mixed, the burnt sienna. I'm going to take it a little bit more golden, touch more burnt sienna than I did before. And I want to go around his snout, beside his snout. So if you look at the reference picture, under his eyes, under the black patch, we've got some yellow going on. So using just the tip of my brush now, I'm going to come around the edge of his snout. And these lovely colours that we're adding a bit of warmth to her fur, Buttercup. I don't think it's a boy with a name like Buttercup. Will make her look warmer. And I'm going to add some more colour to this. I'm going to add some burnt sienna as well in a second. I'm going to bring that out over her face a little bit wider. Just spreading out the colour that I've already put down. And come into her whiskers. Coming across the side of her face. Just pulling that yellow around. I'm not adding any more. But I'm coming around her nose so that her snout's going to stick out. Now, what I will say is you should always have some tissue to hand. If your paint spreads into some of that wet area you don't want, just touch in. It's gone a little bit too close there. And just lift it out with a bit of tissue. I hope that little clip helped to cement in your mind how you can use the wet in wet technique and softening techniques in creating animals. But how about you want to create a sky? Let's take a look at my Pebble Beach again. We have that variegated wash in the sky. Whoops, hold it up. We have that variegated wash in the sky. So let me pop you over to have a look how that was achieved. I'm going to go ahead with some clean water and we're going to wet our paper. Now you should always stretch your paper, particularly when you're going to do a scene like this where we're using quite a lot of water. Now I'm wetting the sky first down to the horizon line. I'm going straight across those rocks because the rocks are going to be dark, so we can put those on top once we're finished. There's Rosemary. Hi Rosemary. So when you're wetting your paper, you want a nice shine to the paper but no big puddles. So you're looking for a gloss, you're looking for that sheen. And I'm going to go straight into my phthalo blue. I'll switch to my round brush now. Can you see my palette? Yep. Good, good. I'm just going to add a little bit. I want my colours for the sky nice and light. So I'm going to keep my puddle really wet. And into that puddle, I'm going to put a tiny bit, see if I can do a tiny bit this time, of magenta. Just to change that blue. There we go. And we're going to sweep in from side to side. You want a nice wet brush. As I say, you don't want this colour too dark. We're going to go across the top of the sky. And then as we come down, I don't want you to add any more paint to your brush. I want you just to use what's there so it gets lighter and lighter as it comes down. I'm going to do that again. At the top, come across, and then walk that brush down the page. Taking a little bit of colour with it, go across your rocks, imagine they're not there. And this way we're going to get a lovely smooth sky. I just want a little bit more colour, top left. So I'm going to go back in, touch more colour, bring that down on the left hand side. Now the reason we're doing this wet in wet is that we don't get any harsh lines in our sky. We have a nice soft sky. Really light, very pale. Then I'm going to add a bit of pink. Woo! We're going to go magenta. Really watered down because it's a strong colour. If you're using my paints, they're very, very strong. And I'm going to bring a little bit of purpley, a bit of pink in here. About halfway down the sky. I'm going to take my watch off because it's annoying me. I'm going to take that up to the rocks and work it down towards the horizon. Let's take a little bit of pink a bit higher up. really pale, watery colours. And now I'm going to pop another bit of blue over the top of the pink near the horizon. And I want that to mix with the pink. Go over the rocks. Touch more pink again. Over the blue. So we're allowing our colours to mix wet in wet on the page. There, that's beautiful. That's the colour I want. Lovely bit of pink in the sky. And just leave that to dry back on its own. Now, I also notice it's a tad orangey. Hi, Alessandra. So I'm going to take a bit of my Hansa yellow. We're not going to use much yellow today. A touch of yellow into my pink. Turn it to an orange. Not too much. Whoops, too much. Not too much, and I'll do too much. Nice and wet. Your colours should be nicely diluted. I'm going to bring that hint of orange through the sky as well. Let it bleed in with the pinks there. Okay, so once you've done your stripes on your sky, I want you to take just a damp brush. I'm just going to lift a little bit of that blue out this middle section. Just with a damp brush, running it through, lifting a bit of that blue back out again. So I've got a nice bright section in the middle of my sky. I'm going to bring that up higher and higher and higher. Don't use tissue for this, just use a damp brush. If you use tissue, you're going to get hard lines. So we've got sort of a little cloud going on there. Lovely. Isn't that subtle? Very, very pretty sky. If you want it a bit stronger, you can go in with your pink again. Let's take it a little bit stronger. I'm working against the studio light, so I'm adding a little bit more pink in that section. So the sky is nice and easy to do. We're just taking a little bit of colour on our wet paper, walking that blue down, adding our pink and a bit more blue along the horizon, and then just adding our yellow into our pink to give us that nice orangey glow in the sky. I hope that was useful. And one last thing before I go. How do you create texture as well in a wet and wet technique? So let's go back to our swatches, go back down to the table. The paint's still wet here. Preferably I'd like this to have dried off a bit more, but it will be fine. So I'm just going to take water, that magic component, on my brush and get rid of the excess by dragging it on the side of my cup. And I'm going to hold my brush horizontal with the paper and give it a tap. And let the little water droplets land in the paint. Now, can you see what's happened? I'll bring it up to the camera. Can you see all these little spots appearing? This is giving you that effect of texture, a really simple way for you to use something that everybody has access to, water, and splattering it on to create that wonderful technique. So to see it in action and how you might use it, let's pop back to the video and have a look at some pebbles. Lovely, 3 colours. Let's start with this big rock over this side. So I'm going to start with a light wash of burnt sienna. Wet on to dry. I'm going to come all the way over this big rock. I want it really weak and watered down. It's a big boulder. Add in a bit more water to my brush. And we want to paint around that rock that's nestled just in front of it. Let's do 2 rocks at a time, otherwise we'll be waiting for things to dry. So I'm going to do this big one here as well. Wet on to dry, weak burnt sienna, coming around the rocks. The lighter colours we're putting down are going to be the highlights in our rocks. Coming right down to the edge of my paper, to the masking tape. Now we're going to go into our brown. Wet onto wet now. So I'm placing this brown away from the light, away from that top surface, and I'm just tapping it into the rock. The only place I'm going to brush it along is the edge of the rock. And then I'm going to tap. I've got quite a nice shadow on this rock. And then into the top surface, just with what's left on my brush, I'm just going to drop a couple of little, tiny little dots into that, wet into wet. Do the other one. There's a bit of a shadow on the top of this rock, so I'm going to bring my brown around that edge, the top of the rock, and stop there. And then I'm going to come down a bit lower. Just look at those rocks, look where the dark shadows are. Wet into wet. Come right down to the end of my page. Block that in. So we're building up our colours. They're going to get stronger. The colour's going to get darker as we go. Now we're going to go grey. Nice and creamy. Just going to drop it in and then brush along the edge of my rock. The only place we want crisp lines around the edges of the rocks. And where wet paint meets dry paper, that's where you'll get a nice crisp edge. And in the middle of our rock, I'm just dotting some grey on. Dot it on. Don't brush it, dot it. The only place you should be brushing is around the edges. Dot it on. And I want some grey flecks up here as well. Whoops, it's too much. Go back to the other rock with your grey. You can brush along the top edge of the rock and then just dot in. Coming down the front edge, there's a dark shadowy spot there. And look how the paint, take note of what's happening on your paper. Look how the paint's moving in the wetness of the paint that's already down. Nice and dark down the bottom here. Just play with that brush, create patterns, and by putting these little droplets on, by just tapping and lifting, you're going to get different strengths of colour. So over here on this edge, I want it dark. I'm just going to touch in and lift off. Wonderful. And a few little specks of grey in the middle. Just really have a shake on your hand, have a little tremor going on. Just pop in some grey tones in that middle area. I want a little bit more burnt sienna, so I'm going to go in again. with my burnt sienna. Lovely. Okay, there's another little trick we're going to do in a moment, but before that I want you to take your paint really, really creamy now, double cream consistency. Take your grey really strong, and we're going to put this shadow in really heavy for this dark area at the bottom. Both of the stones nice and creamy now, guys, so you're getting more pigment, less water. Come around the edge of that rock that's in front, and then I'm still tapping on, wet into wet, placing these shadows, getting really good contrast between the light areas of the rock and the dark. Okay, now there's a time for this next thing that we're going to do. We're going to splatter our rock. If you go too soon with your droplets, you'll get a bloom. This is like a mini bloom. I really hope you found that useful. And just to let you know, if you want to see the full-time videos of these, all you need to do is become a member of my Watercolour Wednesday subscription service. For just £5 a month, you sign up, you get a weekly lesson, which is filmed every Wednesday, but you can watch it whenever you like. But on top of that, you get access to my past library. So you've got nearly 60 videos there at the moment waiting for you, including the panda and the Pebble Beach. So why not pop over to my website and subscribe? Ultimately, I hope you found this useful. Hit the bell, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now. Bye.